Hello, I'm Morris Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor, specializing in the boreal forest, as you can see, the spruce moose forest. And beside me here is Kelly Harlton, who has the acquaintance of about over 40 years, and who is in some cases, well, not following my footsteps, but we've been associated for a long time, and in many cases I feel that the phenomenon that when you become involved with somebody way in the past, they can start off where you leave off. And it's the case here with Kelly, in that if you ever are looking for a substitute for someone like me, you will be happy to find that one exists.
Oh, thanks,
You're
Morris.
looking at him. So the issue is that I'm getting too old to do a lot of these things, and Kelly, being about 25 years younger, would have quite a opportunity ahead of himself yet to indulge in all of this wilderness living skills, bushcraft, and survival. And he's no slouch either, because there are many things that he might have learned from me, but when I see him do it, I say, oh, it's been improved considerably. And it often happens, it doesn't happen too often with other people, but with Kelly, he has often brought in refinements and improvements, and it causes us to think, well, gee, I wish I had caught that before he did, but you know, you only got so much time in your life to do things. At any rate, Kelly is going to put up a ladder. Is that what we're looking at here? Quite often you are stuck with the problem of putting up a cache, and in order for that cache to perhaps even be put out of reach of another human or a bear or some other creatures, you usually put these high up in trees, necessitating a ladder. And when you have done all your caching, then of course the ladder has to be hidden. But at any rate, we might say that the mechanism of building a ladder, it's not complex, but unless you get the gist and idea of how it can be simplified and done in the fastest, easiest possible way, you've got to do it a few times. Now, how many ladders have you built?
A couple dozen, I'm
sure. A couple dozen by now,
sure.
Which means that the more you build them, the more you work out kinks. And that's the difference between those that sit in an armchair and try to ascertain what other people have done and the people who do things over and over and over again, and each time improving or finding how to deal with some annoyance that comes up. Well, I've said enough. Sometimes I talk too much, and we're going to give the exercise here over to Kelly, and we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Morris. Appreciate that intro. Making sure there's no rotten bottoms.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always the issue with lodgepole pine, it has the idiosyncrasy that another tree hits it, and there could be a weak point in it somewhere. So it always helps to develop a way of testing, to find that you go to a lot of bother to construct a thing, and halfway up it fails on you and you get hurt, and you got to start over again. Now, the limiting factor that you probably find with this, you know, how tall a ladder can you make? Well, you got to realize that the poles can be so big that you might not be strong enough to be able to raise them up to where you want them. In some cases, people develop a technique of raising each pole separately. In other cases, people may raise the poles together. at once. And of course, we can't put too much of a limit on the size of poles because you might be a very strong person. So as a result, you could build a ladder twice as big as what some people might build. Or you might find that a 5'2" gorgeous chick. We're using a knot here, which we would say it's either the clove hitch or the constrictor. You see it's a clove hitch that is attaching the two long poles with a bit of slack in between, because when the poles go up, the spacing between the poles, the poles go on each side of the tree you're leaning against, as a means to keep the poles from disengaging themselves from the tree that they are. And the tail ends equally on both sides are there to marlin the rope, so that at each marlin point you end up putting a crossbar, which is the rung in your ladder. It's obvious that when you plan to build a ladder, that you have brought the appropriate rope, or know that the environment will provide it, you might say. The type of half hitch, the technical term I think is the marlin. If you tied an overhand, it would be called something else, but this is a half hitch. That is, the rope does not go in like an overhand knot with the log going through it. It's a half hitch, and of course it works its way down to being low enough that you can make your way up. The spacing between the ladder rungs are what you can manage with regard to the agility that you have brought. And so, you reach the point that the very last is a clove hitch again. So that the way the word clove hitch, when you tie a rope to a non-rope object in many respects, it's called a hitch. When you tie one rope to another, it's called a bend. When you got to realize that in the universal language situation, here obviously the marlin points are made opposite each other, so that the rungs that you put in as you progress will be reasonably level, you might say. And of course the rope wants to be there shouldn't be too much looseness, because that'll come back to haunt you when you put your rungs in. For the person that builds super shelters up a dozen feet in the air, and you don't want the bears to climb up and get you, I guess, or the, I don't know, cougars. It doesn't help. They'll climb the tree after you anyway. You can appreciate that the issue is that when you have built a certain number of ladders, artifacts, whatever, that means that when you have to do it, you've worked out all your kinks, and the ladder goes up in half an hour, not in 2 hours. So the benefit of repetition, in this case, it's the two poles are being lifted at the same time. You can appreciate that if you have a taller ladder that you want to put up for some reason, that you might have to lift the poles separately. You have to have an arrangement where you have to have a kind of a loop affair, that when you stood up the one pole, and then the next pole is stood up and inserted into the end. But the marlin procedure, there's always a little thing like that branch that will come up and sort of annoy you a bit. The spread of the legs have to be such that you don't start going up and discover that the ladder falls over on you. And the length of the ends up there, that you can see that very beginning, if the ends protrude long enough, they'll go behind the tree and help keep the two uprights in place. Now the rungs are placed and it's obvious that as you progress up the ladder, the logs will shorten, and of course and they should be substantial enough that they bear your weight. Now some people might use smaller diameter sticks and put their weight right next to one of the uprights. That way you can get away with smaller sticks. But there's some merit to make the sticks rigid enough that you can climb up the middle of the ladder if you have to, and they don't bend on you. And obviously you don't want a rung to break under your weight, because that will, you either fall out of the tree or hurt yourself if that happens. And of course, that the higher up you go, the shorter the span between the two uprights, the smaller the stick, because a long stick will bend readily. A shorter stick can be smaller diameter. So that now you could conceivably have a group of people and they're walking staffs. So when you have a walking staff, if it's too flexible, it's no good. If it's too rigid, it means it's too much of a burden to be carrying. But if they're very carefully selected, you see something way up that you want to harvest, like a burl or a bit of true tinder fungus or something, and you're working with a group, in the matter of minutes, you can construct a ladder to reach these objects that are up high, that since you can't shinny up the tree to get at them, you might have to build a ladder. And as a group project, it goes up in minutes. After a certain point, you take the handful of rungs with you, and as you progress up, and you'll notice there too that the flexibility of the upright poles, you might sort of think about that, because if you've got a long ladder, it gets a bit scary when you get up way up higher, trying to reach a platform. And you don't want one of those legs to break. So generally, the one way to make sure that the tree is that you may use a green tree, that you may use a vertical tree if it's dry, and a lighter pole is going to be easier to manipulate. But a green pole, it may be more springy and less inclined to fracture on you as you. Now, we almost pray for one of those sticks to break, so we'll have a spectacular event as Kelly makes his way down unexpectedly. So we'll see that there's a certain point where the platform comes. So you go up and you don't want to have your platform at the bitter end. Likely the platform would be on that last rung level so that you can comfortably get up there. You might also, if you're not so agile like me, you're spacing between the rungs. Well, of course, you'll have to make more rungs. But if you're agile and you take the big steps, that means you get the ladder made faster. But the situation here is that everything is built according to your dimension and your strength and agility. Oh, something like that for a healthy, spry young man. You can all the sort of thought that goes into a lot of this stuff is, number one, how quickly can I build something and yet not really break any rules of safety? So sometimes you push it. So the thinner the poles, the easier they are to stand up. The heftier the poles, the more of a weightlifter you have to be to. I would say that the flip-flop winch and the pole that is used as the drum pole that winds up the rope and one of those legs on the ladder, they're probably similar. So you're trying to maximize, and the issue here is that these poles at the size that you see here, and you can see that you get a substantial ladder, could have been extracted from the forest with your knife that might have a blade of 4 or 5 fingers, and that's all the tool that you require. And if the need arises, you don't have to have brought an axe and a saw. Kelly used a saw to speed things up here.